Welcome to Marin Voices and Views. With Lawrence A. Strick, I'm Peter B. Collins. Today, our special guest is California's Lieutenant Governor, Gavin Newsom. Gavin has roots in Marin, graduated from Redwood High School, Santa Clara University. He's a founder of the Plumpjack Empire, which includes in Marin County the Balboa Cafe in Mill Valley. Yeah. He was elected mayor of San Francisco in 2003 and 2007. He also served as a supervisor and a parking and traffic commissioner. He now lives in Kentfield with his wife Jennifer and 3 children. Gavin, welcome back.
Good to be here. Good. I love Plumpjack Empire.
Yeah.
I've never heard that. I love it. But there are 17 businesses now, so it's not so small.
And how many employees?
We have we peaked at 1,000. We're at 700 and something. But it's a remarkable gift. It's been an amazing journey.
That's an empire in my book.
Yeah, I don't know. It's still small. I still feel a small business connection.
Well, Gavin, this has been a landmark year for marriage equality.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court killed Prop 8 and much of the Defense of Marriage Act. 14 states, the District of Columbia, now recognize same-sex marriage rights. 16 nations, including England, France, Spain, Portugal, and Canada. You started all this.
Hardly, but
How did you know that 2004 was the right time? And when did you know?
Yeah, well, a lot of folks didn't believe it was the right time, said it was too much, too soon, too fast. And some folks, literally pointedly blamed the election results on what we did in San Francisco. And how's that for tough morning to reflect on your impact on that potentially? But, I have no regrets about standing up for what I believe. And it's always the right time. Dr. King said this so eloquently. It's always the right time to do the right thing. And you think about this, sincerely, and all the machinations and problems we're seeing in the United States and the lack of real leadership. And somehow we're connoting people in positions of authority as leaders, which is preposterous. And just because you have formal authority doesn't mean you're a leader. And we can get to a larger conversation about that in a moment. But the point is this, there's always another election around the corner. There's a midterm election, there's a gubernatorial election, there's another presidential election. So people are constantly abdicating their sense of purpose and identity to issues because they're playing the games of politics. And that doesn't, I think, serve this country well. It hasn't served issues of social justice and equality well. And so it was a good thing to be able to just release myself from those constraints in 2004, stand up for what I believed, lean in, take some big hits, mostly from my party, not the other side, and then to see this thing begin to change as it's now substantively beginning to change.
So the marriage issue is a huge issue. Your care not cash issue is a huge issue in San Francisco. You're in the business of leadership. You seem like you're going to be in the business for a while. What's the next issue? Where are we going?
Well, I have strong opinions on the drug war, and I'm the only. Here's my indictment of politics. You have a state dominated by Democrats. Every statewide office holder is a Democrat. Not one came out against the death penalty publicly. Not one. Not one came out when it was on the ballot against the reforms or for the reforms for 3 strikes. Not one. Not one has come out for legalizing marijuana or decriminalizing it, not condoning its use, but recognizing the unintended consequences of the failure of the war on drugs as it relates to racial issues and the like. I don't think any of them disagree with any of those points of view, but none said it publicly. This is only to say, what is it about the constraints of office that degenius you, that deny you the ability to stand up and fight the good fight on principle? And the answer is obvious. There's not incentives for good behavior. If you want to move the mouse, you got to move the cheese. Got to change the incentives. That's the gridlock in Congress. Everyone is working in their best interest, not in yours, but theirs. And that's what we have to reconcile. By the way, I was proud to come out against the death penalty, proud to come out for the 3 strikes form, and very proud, though again, I'm not celebrating, I'm not someone that celebrates drug use, but was very proud to say, you know what, this war on drugs is an abject failure, enough's enough, let's move on, and let's deal with the issues, particularly of marijuana. So it doesn't make me better, and in every way, it connects the dot, this conversation, to the first question. When we did what we did in 2004, it was the first 2 weeks I was in office, and the fact that I survived, all of a sudden I was free from those constraints. And in so many ways I've been past my sell-by date. I'm still here, and I'm wondering why you keep still electing me. Thank you.
So with this liberation, don't you create a threat to the get along, go along
Yeah.
politicians?
100%.
And
Yeah,
how,
no, I
how
mean,
do they treat you?
And they're all friends. I mean, they're all my friends. And again, I'm not laying them out. My indictment's a system and the constraints of office. I mean, it was a wonderful quote, right? We're all quoting Lincoln, right? Politicians, because everyone loved the movie. There's a great quote from Lincoln. It said, we're all born originals, but we die copies. We're all born original. We die copies. I see that now with my 3 little kids. All that originality, curiosity. Reminds me of politicians during campaigns. You know, we start buying into the change message and all this energy, and we're out there campaigning, and all of a sudden they take that oath of office, and first year was not as good as I hoped for, not so bad, they're better than the others. First term, not as good, but second term they'll be unleashed from the hackles of re-election, but they don't. They tend to all term out copies, like all the others. Back to the point of governing de-geniuses you. Is it any wonder we weren't celebrating just a few weeks ago, the 1963 March on Washington, we weren't celebrating ex-president Martin Luther King. We never celebrated the life of ex-prime minister or senator Gandhi. He, on multiple occasions, said, why would I ever reduce my influence by getting into elected office? Havel, in the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, infamously wrote about the difficulty of moving from philosopher to politician and how difficult it was to actually govern with the constraints of office. And no one thinks of Nelson Mandela, except some few symbolic moments, as ex-President Mandela. It's leader Mandela. Wasn't Pope Mother Teresa, wasn't Governor Cesar Chavez. There's something about the idea of leadership where people that don't have the constraints are able to exercise more intensity, more passion, and frankly change the trajectory of the world we're living in with much more acuity and success than a lot of us in elected office. That's something I hope folks reflect on and consider. They exercise their moral authority.
You published a book earlier this year called Citizenville, How to Take the Town Square Digital and Reinvent Government. And one of the things that really touched me in the book is a story that you've told about rewarding failure in your business at Plumpjack. Tell our viewers about that, and then about your encounter with Stephen Colbert on the book tour.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, that's the only way to describe it, encounter. Bloody genius he is, damn it. Excuse my language.
Okay, first of all, the Plumpjack failure
well,
reward.
I subscribe to Winston Churchill's wonderful line. He said, the secret of all success, Churchill, so it's worth almost listening to. The secret of all success is moving from failure to failure with enthusiasm. And I love that. Look, I grew up with pretty severe learning disability, so there wasn't any having made it for me as it relates to traditional forms of academic achievement. My sister would come home, spend 30 minutes on her homework and get straight A's, and here I was, I could spend 15 hours and I was lucky to get a C, and they were being generous in the classroom. So I understood failure early on, but mistakes are a portal of discovery. And what I learned is that when you are failing, you're learning new things, and you are taking some responsibility and account to changing things. Dogs don't bark at parked cars. If you want a long career in politics, as dull, God bless you. It is so dull. But, the secret of success there is just, navigate. It's the right time. Okay. And, you'll one day get that chicken dinner and you'll get a certificate of honor and 45 people say, really, you've been great. Thanks so much. And walk past you in the grocery store and say, oh yeah, you were the ex so-and-so. So I'm someone in my business that was so sick and tired of people playing it safe and saying, well, that's not my job, that's the housekeeper's job, or that's the bellman's job, that we decided to incentivize good behavior, which means sometimes we incentivized bad behavior by encouraging people to do something, to change the order of things. Started at our restaurant, or rather, a hotel up in Squaw Valley. We had a big mosquito problem. There were little ponds outside. I had a night clerk. He decided on his own, without any permission, to buy a bunch of catfish. And things like a good idea. He throws a catfish in the pond. He's going to take care of the mosquitoes, which every guest was complaining about in Squaw Valley. And Next morning, the engineer calls me first thing in the morning, Ludo. He hasn't called me in 14 years. That is not a good sign when an engineer calls you. You don't even want to know his name. Things are going well. Calls me panicked. He says, I can't believe what I'm seeing. I'm really worried. I'm seeing fish parts all over the hotel. There's eyeballs, there's fish fins, there's skeletal remains. Obviously, we've been vandalized. Let me get to the bottom of this. And he's hyperventilating. I said, Ludo, relax, get back to me. He goes, you can't believe this. He goes, Gavin, the night clerk, this idiot, he needs to be fired. He went out and he apparently bought some catfish. He put it in the pools and the ponds. He claimed to be doing it because he wanted to help deal with the mosquito problem. Well, the damn raccoons, they jumped right into the water and they feasted on these fish, and they ran deliriously through the open doors of the hallways of the hotel and thus the body parts. And I said, that's such a great failure that we're going to reward him with a $500 bonus. The failure award was born in our business.
Stephen Colbert.
Tough, because he never gave me an opportunity to say 2 words, so he just jumped right in. He's brilliant. His writers are genius. He's genius. And so I admire and like him. But I will confess, I didn't watch him for a few weeks after. It was interesting. He was just a tough interview. And I was there on a Friday night. I did Meet the Press a few days later. And I remember sitting back and Meet the Press like this, with Chris Matthews. Go ahead, please. Oh, what are we talking? Iraq? Fine. McCain's on the screen in the back. Let me tell you about Senator McCain. I mean, after Colbert, everything I did on that book tour, from Maher on down, was a cakewalk.
He gave you a hard time, and he gave you a hard time about a contribution you made to some charity that he was working with, basically calling you a cheapskate. And then you referred to yourself as a civil servant. Yeah. And that's what attracted me to the interview. Nice. And my question to you is, what is your feeling about civil servants? And is there a place for people to serve with what you're hearing about how bad government is and how we got to close it down, these terrible things? And I get the sense that you don't feel that way.
No, in fact, the whole book is an ode to government, but a new kind of government and a new construct of thinking around government, not government as a petition site where we petition government to do more for us, but a new kind of engagement. That's the old mindset, the industrial age mindset of the machine. A giant vending machine. Donald Kettle wrote about this years ago. Said government acts like a vending machine. You put $1 of taxes and you get police, fire, healthcare, national defense, whatever it is, education. And if you don't like what you get, you do what everyone does with a machine. You kick the machine, you shake it. The Occupy movement maybe on one side, or the vestiges of it, and obviously Tea Party and others, or the elections. But the debate's about the size of the machine, as opposed to a new construct of thinking, which is what I laid out in Citizenville, which is government as a platform. That we would be big on what? My friend Eric Liu talks about this. Be big on what? Deal with the issues of big ignorance, poverty, disease, income inequality, whatever it is that we care deeply about to solve, but less prescriptive on the how. And that's really what Steve Jobs came up with, that platform. He didn't come out with 800,000 apps. Quite the contrary. He's a curator, cultivator. And he's about the ingenuity and the innovation that exists latently inside of all of us. And he networked that on this new platform. And that's kind of thinking that I want to bring into government. And I want to unleash our civil servants, our public servants, to be part of a two-way conversation with the public, where we have real active citizenship, not inert citizenship, where government's doing more things to us, but where government's beginning to do things with us. So we can reconcile this divide that exists in cities large and small. You saw LA, barely 25% of people that were registered, which means in the teens of that city, had any interest in one of the most important elections, which wasn't just for the mayor, it was for city council members, bonds. They just aren't engaged because they don't believe. We've got to reconcile that. And so active citizenship, unleashing the remarkable latent capacity of the ingenuity that exists inside of all public servants to be more participatory and more engaged, take more risks, enlightened risks, as it relates to changing the operating system that exists, that has served us well, but no longer is relevant to the world we're living in.
Gavin, you referenced the Democratic dominance of statewide office and also Democrats' control on and off both houses of the legislature. So there was fear that one-party rule would lead to huge tax increases and great overreach by the Democrats. I'd like to ask you to contrast what's happened in California under one-party rule in the last 2 years. with the radical moves that have happened in red states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, North Carolina, Texas,
Yep.
where voting rights and fundamental reproductive rights are being sharply rolled back by very radical one-party rule.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, whatever your perspective is, whatever set of eyes you see the world, you'll see it like that. I have some very rabid Republican friends that think California's got off the deep end since we, Democrats, took control. They think the idea that we're expanding abortion rights with the headwinds of every other major state, particularly as red states, contracting those rights, is an example of our extremism. They feel the work that we have done to expand the rights of undocumented folks in this state are extreme. Driver's licenses for undocumented citizens, all the other things. They think the gun rights restrictions, as they see them, have been radical restrictions, extreme restrictions by the Democratic Party, and they think our taxes are absolutely oppressive, the highest in the nation, 13.3%, outrageous, an example of the hubris of our party. So it depends on your perspective. By the way, I am pleased with all of those points of view and grateful we have Governor Jerry Brown who signed those bills in a Democratic legislature, and I think we have been tempered and more moderate than some had expressed or been concerned about. But again, it just depends your set of eyes. That's the divide that exists in the country. There seems to be sincerity, tragically, on both sides of the aisle. These ideological folks on both sides who just can't imagine the other side doesn't understand why they're not the more extreme of the two. And that's what we have to thaw, and that's the world we have to reconcile. We're all in this together. There's no leak on your side of our boat, and that we're all better off when we're all better off.
I need to ask you about the University of California. You're a regent.
Yeah.
How do you like that role? How do you see your role, and how are they doing these days?
Best part of my job. It's a system that is insolvent as it continues down this trajectory. We're no longer a monopoly. We've had it good for a generation, and it's too expensive.
What do you mean we're not a monopoly?
We're not a monopoly. I mean, you can get, there's all kinds of contours of change, and this goes to my whole framework of my book, Citizenville. The industrial economy has run out of gas. It has served us extraordinarily well for a century. Don Tapscott is writing brilliantly about this. You look at media and what's happened in newspapers. A guy named Craig came along with a list. Craig's list. All of a sudden, the economic model was gutted. You see what happened in the stock brokerage business. My gosh, financial service industry. I have an old uncle, he passed away years ago, Rick, would be in the Balboa Cafe, my old restaurant, and he'd be drinking 2 martinis by 1 or 2 in the afternoon, talking about the good old days, where you and I had to buy 1 share of stock, but you had to pay him $250 until a guy named Chuck came along and screwed it all up. And Schwab was created, and discount brokerages, and eSchwab, and E-Trade, or whatever these are. You've seen the same thing happening in music industry when Steve came along. And all of a sudden, Sean Parker and Napster and our good friend from Marin, Lars Ulrich, were going at it as it relates to the music industry. And Jobs goes, you know what, I got an idea. And he goes to the Moscone Center in San Francisco. And ladies and gentlemen, iTunes. You don't ever have to buy an album. Again, you can buy that one song, which is all you wanted. All of a sudden, that industry is flattened. You've seen the same thing with the share economy, Lyft and Uber Cab, and the big monopolies of taxi cabs being threatened by this. Seeing the contours of this change everywhere. To wit, my point as it relates to what's happening in government. We have a generation that's growing up digital, a generation where they've been bathed in bits, a generation that wants choice. And we have a government that's still mass education, fast food model of conformity from one to many, and that is no longer relevant, thus the point at UC and CSU. It's the one form of education that has served us well, or it's the only one we've known for a century and a half. It hasn't changed. If you came back from the 1860s, you still go in a classroom at most UCs, it looks exactly the same, except they have something called chalk and a PowerPoint. 2 big Now you've got these MOOCs out there, these online folks that are changing, that recognizing there's a different change of pedagogy, that these digital natives that are growing up digital, this generation of choice, they can't be educated like we were educated. Sage on the stage, lecturing you, pen to paper, testing you on that rote memorization. And now people are saying, why the rows of desks based on your date of manufacture, the same age cohorts? When we learn better in groups and teams? Can't we flip the classroom? Isn't it better to make teachers mentors and coaches as opposed to lecturers. Isn't it smarter not to live in a world that no longer exists by expecting that that ringing bell that existed in Ben Franklin's day is still ringing today, and we take the summer months off to, head up to, I don't know, Napa to till the fields? I mean, it's sort of laughable. It's a century and a half old, a system that no longer lives in the context of the world we're living in. And so all these things, these MOOCs are coming along, these independent nonprofits, these for-profit education systems are challenging that big, laborious, top-down public education system.
Is the University of California nimble enough to compete in that world?
Not right now. And look, it's like Kodak. We love Kodak. If we were on the board of directors of Kodak, I feel like that as a trustee of the UC Regents, we're thinking, what's this shiny new object? Young man, I've been here 45 years. And you always over.
I knew Mr. Eastman.
I knew Mr. Eastman. I mean, sure, we invented. Now Kodak would have said we invented the digital camera. They did, but they never took it seriously.
Right.
And by the way, every year they were doing fine. They were Kodak. Okay, we had a great quarterly report. It wasn't as good as it used to be, but it's still dominant. I mean, we are it. In every survey, we are number one. We're in the top 10. Isn't that UC? We're number 5 in the top finest higher education. It's true. All that's true, and we should be proud of it. And I'm proud of that system. I don't want to destroy it. But I think we have to wake up to this hyperconnectivity that we live in now. This world is radically changing. I gave you the examples of other industries. We have to wake up to it. And I think the UC Regents need to wake up to it. We're going to have a dynamic new head of the system in Janet Napolitano. She doesn't suffer fools. She's not going to sit back. She's going to listen first, seek first to understand, but then she's going to, I think, lean in pretty aggressively, and I think we have to. You can't afford it. Student debt's oppressive. Too many other competitors out there. New pedagogies of learning. Google is now partnering with 50 other businesses, not with the UC, but with folks like Coursera and Udacity universities online, because they don't accept people, even at the UCs that are getting straight A's into their workforce. They have their own certification process now, which suggests we're not conveying the talent that these folks need in the right way. We're going to have to alter that paradigm.
Gavin, we're now spending more on prisons than on higher education. And I think the governor has made some important moves with realignment and with letting the parole process for lifers run without political interference. But his defiance of the federal judges who control the prison healthcare system and in turn the overcrowding issue, to me is over the top. And it seems that he's in denial that prisoners continue to die. We have a high suicide rate.
Yeah.
He resisted the transfer of those exposed to valley fever from the institutions in the Central Valley. And now he's, thumbing his nose at the judges over the deadline and threatening to spend 2/3 of the limited surplus that we've developed since the Schwarzenegger debacle on housing prisoners, some out of state. And
Yeah.
Darrell Steinberg has a much more intelligent plan
Yes, he
to
does.
attack the underlying issue, which is repeat offenders.
Yeah, Darrell deserves an enormous amount of credit on this. By the way, Darrell was the father of realignment. I remember working with Jerry out on the campaign trail. He wasn't there on realignment, and now, of course, has embraced it, understandably so, under the constraints of what the court has placed on us and also the economic constraints. Look, so let me argue from Brown's perspective. He's done more than most expected under very difficult circumstances in a way where we haven't seen the unintended consequences of those that were criticizing any moves outside a centralized, top-down, statewide system into the counties.
No Willie Horton.
No Willie Horton, God bless. Right? Every day you wake up worried about that. So does the governor. So tens of thousands of prisoners have moved. We have expanded resources for the counties through that realignment process because of Prop 30. Governor deserves credit again on that. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have made the progress we did. So he's at a point where he feels now very pressured and stressed. We've radically moved in a new direction. He's got these 9,000 plus folks he needs to do. He made I thought, bad decision to consider the private prison system, which should be abolished from my humble perspective.
Thank you.
And I was particularly concerned that the prison guards union, that was its biggest critic, all of a sudden was now starting to embrace it because, well, they would have some different role in this. But luckily, Steinberg comes along and says, you're all moving in that direction. I think we have a more principled approach, which deals, as you say, more with the underlying consequences and other issues. And his has been given a shot. And Brown is sort of putting that up. And as he's shoving as he's pushing back on the courts on one hand, he's offering Daryl's solution on the other, and we'll see how what their reaction is, and then begin to make the final adjustments. But I'm going to give Brown, for the grace of God, go any of us in his position, to have to make these tough calls and go through this very dramatic change, the way we've done things, some credit. And I give Daryl some credit for being enlightened, the final analysis of really pushing this and not backing off on, frankly, where most Democrats were going with the governor's support.
Gavin, you've had your own TV show on Current. It's gone. It was.
I know, it's Al Jazeera, which actually is not so bad. I mean, I miss my TV show.
Well, that's the question.
Yeah.
What did you feel about being on cable? Do you like the state of cable the
Love
way it is
cable.
now? and actually, I know some people here who might give you a show.
Hey, I like that. I love it. And I had some fun guests. I had Lance Armstrong's last interview where he was lying about steroid use, which I think was important. We had Marissa Meyer when it just came to Yahoo. I wore the Google Glass the first time with Sergey and interviewed him for the first time ever with his wife, Ann. We had some fun guests, and I loved it. It was just great to be on the other side of the questions, and I hope to continue it.
Talk a little bit about your wife, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, and her work as a filmmaker, because she's done some very important work.
Yeah, she's getting me in trouble. God bless her. She's got a whole movement called misrepresentation.org, and she's got a hashtag called NotBuying It. And anytime she sees gender stereotypes, she'll go after a lot of folks without any discrimination. So I'll have meetings with some businesses. They'll say, can you tell your wife to stop sending us 200,000 tweets from across the country criticizing our last T-shirt because it didn't have a gender, it wasn't gender balanced. She's been amazing. Misrepresentation is a great movie. The organization's now potent and powerful, making the movie real, working on a new film called The Mask You Live In, and did a crowdsourcing. It's just, again, back to the world and the contours of the world we're living in. Crowdsourced a lot of the funding and just overnight was able to fund this film. And it is, I've seen a lot of the clips. It's going to be, I think, just a real success and an eye-opener.
Well, Gavin, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been an interesting and wide-ranging conversation, and you honored your promise to come back. We appreciate it.
It took how many years?
2.5.
A couple of years.
Unbelievable. Well, if you ask me again, we'll make it much quicker. I'm in the neighborhood now. There's no excuse.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys.